The romantic image of a pirate ship is a lie. It is not a symbol of freedom. It is a floating volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. Aboard the frigate were over 20 tons of black powder, the equivalent of hundreds of modern aerial bombs packed into a single wooden hull. The crew lived, worked, and slept on this giant bomb. The slightest spark or any leak meant instant death for everyone. Their main enemy wasn't an opposing fleet, but the environment itself. Salt water and constant humidity. 20 tons of powder is enough to launch a 300-ton ship into the air like a champagne cork. How did they manage not just to survive, but to dominate the ocean when their primary weapon was so vulnerable? The secret lay in a series of forgotten engineering solutions. This raises the first fundamental mystery. How could pirates, whose power came from their cannons, maintain accurate and rapid fire during a storm? After all, any drop of water turned gunpowder into useless sludge. But there is a second, deeper mystery. Why would an experienced gunner fear slightly damp powder far more than powder that was completely soaked and useless? The answer lies in the deadly physics of combustion. Slightly damp powder didn't explode. It would smolder, turning the cannon into a plugged-up bomb that could rupture right on the deck. We will unravel the secret to firing in a storm in Section 5, and the deadly paradox of wet powder in the climax, Section 7. The image of a pirate is familiar to us all. A cutlass, rum, a parrot on the shoulder. This is a convenient myth from books and movies. We are here to completely shatter that image. A cutlass was useless if the cannons were silent, and the cannons fell silent without dry powder. The true genius of pirates lay not in combat tactics, but in their engineering ingenuity and meticulous discipline. They were masters of survival, unsung engineers in a perpetual battle with the ocean. You will see how a 5-layered defense system, crafted from wood, resin, and paper, allowed them to become the masters of the seas. You will learn to see the pirate not as a rogue, but as a technologist. The most valuable skill was not swordsmanship, but a knowledge of chemistry and physics. Our investigation will take us through 3 key engineering zones of the ship. In about 4 minutes, we will descend below the waterline to the most protected place on the vessel. You will see how the ship's very architecture became an impregnable fortress to protect the powder. In 9 minutes, we will examine a technological breakthrough, how the shift from huge barrels to small paper cartridges revolutionized naval warfare, and in 18 minutes, we will reveal the most intense ritual on board, what pirates did when all defense systems failed. The procedure for drying damp powder was so dangerous that a single mistake cost the entire crew their lives. In 4 minutes, you'll learn why the bottom of the ship was the safest place. In 9, how paper defeated water. And in 18, how to dry gunpowder without blowing yourself up. How could it be that the most vulnerable place for leaks on any wooden vessel, its bottom, under the pressure of thousands of tons of water, was chosen as the most secure storage for gunpowder? Logic suggests this was suicidal. Pirates deliberately placed their most hygroscopic resource in the area of maximum risk. At first glance, the explanation is simple: protection in battle. The powder magazine was located deep in the hold, below the waterline. Enemy cannonballs piercing the hull would lose their momentum in the water. The ocean itself became a form of armor, absorbing the impact of a projectile like a fist sinking into wet sand. But this is only half the truth. We are talking about 20 tons of explosives. This wasn't a storeroom, it was an engineering bunker the size of a room. To light it, they used separate light rooms with windows looking into the magazine to eliminate any open flame. This fortress was meticulously designed. But even the most impregnable fortress is useless if the treasure inside isn't protected by its own armor, and that armor began with the barrel. Imagine a completely dark enclosed space in the belly of the ship, smelling of resin and sulfur. Enemy cannonballs couldn't reach here. What made the most hardened pirates move with almost religious reverence in this space? The answer, it would seem, lies with one man. The ship's gunner was not just a soldier, but the high priest of this place. His daily inspection ritual was the key to the crew's survival. But his enemy was not carelessness, it was static electricity. Wearing shoes with iron nails was forbidden in the magazine. The gunner wore special felt slippers, feeling the cold of the lead-lined floor. A single accidental spark from a horseshoe nail on a boot meant instant death. Human discipline was critical. But the gunner knew his strictest rituals were powerless if the thing he was guarding, the powder barrel itself, was flawed. Why did shipwrights waste resources lining the magazines from the inside with expensive sheets of lead or copper? The thick oak planks of the hull already provided strength. This created an additional layer of waterproofing, but the real threat came not from the outside, but from within. A wooden ship teemed with life. Rats and wood-boring beetles were constant companions to the sailors. A single pair of ship rats could produce up to 1,250 offspring in a year, creating an entire army of rodents. They gnawed through wood, compromising the seal of the barrels. A metal lining was the only reliable defense against their teeth. Every element of the magazine was part of a defense against all threats, from a cannonball to a rat's tooth. But this ingenious system was useless if the container for the powder was made improperly. We have built the perfect fortress, below the waterline, protected from cannonballs, water, fire, and even rodents. This was the first, fundamental level of defense, the architectural one. But the best fortress in the world only protects the treasure stored within it. What if the treasure chest itself is leaky? Now we shift our focus from the macro level of the ship to the micro level of the container. The next step will reveal why the ship's cooper was one of the most important figures on board, and why his barrels were a true marvel of engineering for their time. Entrusting the most dangerous substance on board to a wooden barrel, assembled from dozens of individual staves, seems like madness. Every seam is a potential point of leakage. But this was no ordinary barrel. Ship's coopers fitted the staves with such precision that a knife blade could not be inserted between them. The hoops created immense pressure, turning the seams into a monolithic seal. However, the true genius lay in another detail. The hoops on powder barrels were made not of iron, but of copper or wood. An iron hoop could create a spark upon accidental impact or friction. In a powder magazine, that was a death sentence. The design protected against two threats at once, water and fire. But even the most perfect wood is a porous material. It needed a second, impenetrable skin. Who was the unsung hero whose work in peacetime was more critical than the captain's actions in battle? The ship's cooper. His workshop smelled of wood shavings and resin. Every hammer blow was part of a precise ritual aimed at achieving an absolute seal. But the culmination was not the strike. It was the application of boiling resin to the internal and external seams. The cooper wasn't just sealing cracks. He was engaging in a direct battle with the ocean, creating a barrier designed to withstand any storm. This process was like healing a wound. The hot resin penetrated the pores of the wood, creating a strong, waterproof scar. The cooper was on the front line of the war against nature, but to win, he needed special ammunition. He was something of an alchemist. Why was white oak, often a more expensive type of wood, used specifically for powder barrels? Wouldn't any strong wood suffice? The obvious answer is density. Oak does have fine pores, which makes it less permeable to water. But that's only half the story. The main enemy in the hold over a period of months was not water, but rot. Oak wood is rich in tannins, natural preservatives. They make it extremely resistant to rot and mold. An oak barrel could last up to 10 years in a damp hold, whereas a pine barrel would rot in 2. The choice of material was a scientific approach, but even wood that was perfect by nature needed artificial enhancement. So, we have created a nearly perfect wooden container. It is strong, with seamless joints, protected from sparks by copper hoops, and made from rot-resistant oak. But wood is a living, porous material. It breathes, absorbing and releasing moisture from the surrounding air. In the 100% humidity of the hold, this meant a slow but certain death for the gunpowder. To defeat the ocean, the wood's pores had to be sealed permanently. An artificial, flexible, and completely waterproof skin had to be created. The next chapter of our investigation is dedicated to shipboard alchemy, how they used simple ingredients like resin, tar, and fat to create coatings that we would today call composite materials. How did the simplest materials, pine resin, tar, and animal fat, create a coating that could withstand months in salt water? At first glance, They were simply mixing everything that repelled water. Resin and tar are known waterproofing agents. Fat repels water. But the secret was not in the ingredients, but in their synergy. Pure resin becomes brittle and cracks in the cold. Tar is too liquid. It was the animal fat that gave the mixture its elasticity. This coating remained flexible as the barrel deformed with temperature changes. It was not just a sealant, but a composite material that turned the barrel into a hermetically sealed capsule. This was a victory over humidity and storage, but this victory created a new problem: how to quickly open such a barrel in combat without ruining the powder in the rain. A storm is gathering on the horizon. A flurry of activity begins on deck. Cauldrons of tar and resin are boiling, and the acrid smoke fills the air, overpowering the salty smell of the ocean. The cooper's team applies the hot mixture to the seams of the barrels. It is a race against the approaching storm. Their task is to create an impenetrable skin before the first squall hits. And there it is, the enemy. A giant wave crashes over the deck, dumping tons of water on their work. All eyes are on the barrels. Will the seams hold? Success. The barrels are completely dry inside. It is a triumph of engineering. But this total seal creates a paradox. They are now sealed shut. In the heat of battle, under the rain, how do you quickly open such a barrel and get the powder out without letting water ruin the rest? Did they have quality standards for this mixture? Or did each cooper mix it by eye, hoping for the best? An experienced master did indeed judge the consistency by its color, viscosity, and smell. It was an unwritten standard, passed down from master to apprentice. However, modern reconstructions prove there is an optimal ratio of resin to fat for creating an elastic coating. Too much fat, and the mixture won't set. Too little, and it will crack in the cold. Pirates found this golden ratio through trial and error. A deviation of just 10% in the fat proportion halved the coating's lifespan. This was applied chemistry, perfectly solving the problem of protecting bulk quantities of powder. But it was useless for combat, which required individual protection for each shot. Now you are the gunner. Cannons are roaring, the deck is slippery with water and blood, and it's pouring rain. Next to you is a barrel of gunpowder, sealed tight with resin. Your cannon is ready. What do? If you start to open it, the rain will instantly ruin its entire contents. If you don't, you're defenseless. You have 30 seconds until the enemy's next volley. Any decision leads to defeat. The defense system, perfect for storage, became a curse in combat. The pirates found an ingenious and ridiculously simple solution to this problem. The answer changed not only the rules of powder storage, but the entire tactics of naval warfare. They switched to paper. It sounds insane. Using a material that fears water as much as gunpowder itself? At first glance, this was simply to speed up reloading. The gunner didn't have to measure the powder. He took a ready-made paper cartridge with a pre-measured charge, tore it open, and poured the contents down the barrel. But the genius was in the final step. Each finished cartridge was dipped in molten wax or animal fat. This thin layer, upon hardening, transformed the fragile paper into a miniature waterproof capsule. Protection became individual. Now, one could open a sealed barrel, take out a handful of these capsules, reseal the barrel, and continue fighting in a downpour. This is the direct answer to the mystery of firing in a storm. The system worked like a pea pod. The barrel was the tough outer shell, and each cartridge was a separate pea, protected by its own skin. In the dim light below deck, during the lulls between battles, dozens of pirates sit and perform a monotonous task. They are not cleaning their weapons or drinking rum. They are making cartridges. This was an onboard factory production. One measures the powder, another rolls the paper tubes, a third dips them in boiling wax. But the scale of this process changes everything. 20 tons of powder required not hundreds, but tens of thousands of these cartridges. To use their entire supply, the crew had to make about 40,000 cartridges by hand. It was a titanic, almost endless labor that turned the living quarters into a veritable factory. This monotonous, un-pirate-like work was as crucial to victory as bravery in boarding actions. But even a perfectly sealed cartridge had to be carried to the cannon, and this final, most dangerous journey required personal protection. Why was the paper for cartridges sometimes impregnated with one of the components of gunpowder itself, saltpeter? Didn't this make it even more flammable? The obvious answer was for firing safety. Paper treated with saltpeter burned completely in the barrel, leaving no smoldering residue that could cause a premature explosion of the next charge. However, there was a second hidden effect. As the saltpeter crystallized in the fibers, it made the paper less susceptible to airborne moisture. This was an additional passive layer of protection even before the wax coating. Artillery manuals from the early 18th century, such as The Complete Gunner, explicitly prescribed this procedure. Each element of the system served multiple purposes simultaneously, and this system led directly to the final line of defense. We have built a multi-layered system. The architectural protection of the magazine, the sealed integrity of the barrel, the composite resin coating, and the individual waxed cartridge. The powder seems completely safe. But all of this worked only until the gunner stepped onto the upper deck. Here, amidst the waves and rain, began the most vulnerable stage, the last few feet from the cartridge box to the cannon's muzzle. How was the gunner's personal equipment designed? What materials and constructions were used for the personal fortress in which he carried the ready-to-fire cartridges? This is where personal protection came into play. The next step will reveal the secrets of powder horns and cartridge boxes, the final line of defense for the gunpowder. This entire complex system could be undone in the final seconds before firing. What good is a waterproof cartridge if the bag it's in gets soaked and the gunner pulls it out with wet hands? A personal safe was needed. The answer was the powder horn, made from a bull's horn. Horn is light, strong, and does not absorb water, but its genius lay not in the material, but in the mechanism. At the end of the powder horn was a spring-loaded valve. It could be opened with a thumb for a single moment, like an eyelid in a sandstorm, releasing a precise portion of 80 grams of powder directly into the barrel. Exposure to the humid air was reduced to a fraction of a second. This was not just a container, but a precision dispenser that combined storage, protection, and measurement. Now, imagine this technology in the midst of chaos. The deck is slick, the wind is tearing at hats, and the enemy is on the horizon. A gunner methodically checks his gear. Powder horn on his belt, cartridges in his pouch, fuse dry. This is his ritual. Suddenly, a giant wave crashes over the ship, a wall of icy roaring chaos with the sound of splintering wood. He's knocked off his feet. He slides across the wet planks, and his first instinct is not to save himself, but to clutch the powder horn to his chest, shielding it with his body. He struggles to his feet and pours a pinch of powder into his palm. It's perfectly dry. The system worked because the man became a living component of it. His discipline was the final, unwritten layer of defense. But why did pirates for centuries use cow horn specifically, and not seemingly stronger materials like wood or metal? Wood would swell, iron would rust, and critically, could create a spark. Copper and brass were expensive, heavy, and could dent, jamming the valve. Horn was the perfect compromise, but it had another, less obvious property. The thin walls of a treated horn are translucent. A gunner didn't need to open his powder horn to see how much powder was left. He could simply hold it up to the light. Those 2 seconds saved on checking his ammunition could be the difference between a timely shot and a cannonball tearing through the hull. We have constructed 5 concentric circles of defense. First, the architecture of the magazine. Second, the integrity of the oak barrel. Third, the chemical skin of resin. Fourth, the individual waxed cartridge. And the fifth and final line, the gunner's equipment and composure. It was a triumph of engineering over the elements. But what happened when this near-perfect system finally failed? Pirates faced a shocking paradox. Powder that was completely soaked and ruined was safe, but powder that could still be salvaged turned the ship into a bomb with a smoldering fuse, and the procedure to save it was the most terrifying ritual on board. The most dangerous substance on a pirate ship was not dry powder, nor completely wet powder, but that which was in between, slightly damp. How could something that seems partially saved be more dangerous than something completely lost? At first glance, the salvage procedure looked simple. On a clear day, a large canvas tarp was spread out on deck, and the damp powder was spread on it in a thin layer. Sailors would carefully rub it between their hands to break up the clumps, but this was an illusion of routine maintenance. Gunpowder is a mechanical mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, which absorb moisture at different rates. This upset the perfect balance. Such salvaged powder would not explode in the barrel. It burned slowly and unevenly, like a damp log, creating a monstrous pressure spike. Cast iron an arm's width thick would shatter into shrapnel. Knowing this, a gunner who discovered a leak faced the most terrible choice of his life. He stands in the dim light of the magazine, inhaling the scent of dampness. He reaches into a barrel and feels the moist clumps. The first safe option is to bring the barrel on deck and throw it overboard. This guarantees the crew's survival. But on a pirate ship, the logic of survival was different. One such barrel contained about 100 pounds of powder, the equivalent of over 400 pistol shots. To lose it meant becoming defenseless. Powder was currency, and the gunner, feeling the eyes of the crew on him, would give the order to prepare for drying. This was not an act of recklessness, but a calculated risk driven by brutal necessity. And the first step in this ritual was a test that could itself be the last. How do you test the quality of an explosive without blowing up the ship? Far from the magazine, on the open deck, the gunner would take a dry copper plate. He would sprinkle a thin line of powder from the dried batch onto it and ignite it with a red-hot rod. He analyzed not the fact of combustion, but its quality. Perfect powder flashed instantly, like a camera flash, leaving only a faint white spot. But sick powder burned slower, hissed, produced a yellowish smoke, and left behind a black, oily residue, like soot on the bottom of a pot. This was unburned charcoal, a sure sign that the powder was dangerous. The lives of the entire gun crew depended on the gunner's ability to read the fire. This risky dance with death was the pinnacle of the pirate gunner's craft. It was a fusion of chemical knowledge, intuition, and cool-headedness. It is moments like these that prove a pirate's life was not a series of raids, but a constant, high-tech war against their main enemy, the ocean. We have examined all the elements of their survival arsenal individually, from the ship's architecture to desperate salvage measures. But the true genius was revealed in how they were assembled into a single system. We have seen the bricks. In the finale, we will see the cathedral they built from them. This entire defense system was built on the principle of a Russian nesting doll, 6 fortresses, one inside the other. The first, the ship's architecture, hiding the magazine below the waterline. The second, the perfect oak barrel, protecting the coating. The third, the alchemical resin, protecting the cartridge. The fourth, the waxed paper, protecting the powder itself. The fifth, the gunner's personal powder horn, protecting the moment of loading. And the sixth and final one, the desperate rituals of drying when all previous lines of defense had fallen. This was a philosophy of defense in depth. Each layer was designed with the assumption that the outer one could be breached. It was this redundancy, this 6-fold backup, that made the system almost impervious to chaos. Which of these 6 walls of defense do you find the most ingenious? Trying to name a single main secret of the pirates is doomed to fail. There was no secret. There was a system. Its strength lay in the synergy of completely different disciplines. Naval architecture worked in tandem with the cooper's craft. The cooper's craft depended on applied chemistry. Chemistry was useless without the logistics of mass-producing cartridges, and this entire technological pyramid rested on one foundation: iron discipline and human factor management. Remove any single element, and the entire chain breaks. A ship with an ingenious magazine but an undisciplined gunner was doomed. This system worked like a human body. The architecture was the skeleton, the barrels the skin, the resin the immune system, and the gunner's discipline the brain. Remove one, and everything perishes. At the very beginning, we promised to completely destroy the image of the pirate. That moment has come. On one hand, the myth, rum, a parrot, reckless bravado. On the other, the reality we have uncovered. A meticulous specialist, whether it's a cooper applying resin or a gunner reading fire by the color of its smoke. This is the image not of a bandit, but of an engineer. The pirate of the Golden Age was, above all, a pragmatic technologist surviving in a hostile environment. His main enemy was not a Spanish galleon, but salt water. His main battle was not for gold, but for dry powder. Forget the captain at the helm. The chief technologist on board was the gunner, managing a 20-ton floating bomb. This changes our perception of naval battles. We have seen two sides of pirate life. The well-known one, their fury and courage in battle, and the hidden one, their methodical, almost scientific approach to solving complex engineering problems. So what ultimately made pirates such a formidable force? Their ferocity in combat, or their engineering ingenuity in the struggle against the elements? Write just one word in the comments that you believe was the key to their success: battle or engineering. Let's see which aspect of their legacy proves more important to us today.